So you want to learn how to make beats. Well, then you came to the right place. But before you can make beats, you need to understand what music is. And music is made up of three main things. And those things are harmony, which is basically just chords, melody, which is individual sequences of notes, and rhythm, which is just playing notes in time. So when you're making beats, because you're making music, you'll need these three things. By the way, all the sounds I used for this beat come from my brand new Lyra Essentials kit. It has everything you need to make beats, and it's half off right now, so check it out. Starting up with chords, aka your harmony, you need to understand what chords are. Now, depending on where you get your definition, a chord is anything more than 2 notes, or anything more than 2 notes, including 2 notes. Now, to make basic chords, you need to understand what a triad is, and a triad is just 3 notes stacked vertically in thirds. What the is a third? And a third is just the third note in the scale from the note it's related to. And now that kind of gets into the numbering of things, because you can number each note in your scale from 1 to 7, where that number relationship goes back to the root note of your scale. So the B here is the 7th from the C sharp, and is also the 7th in my scale. But at the same time, it's also the 2nd from the A. Now, if you don't know your scales, don't worry. Your DAW has got your back. You can right click on this little music note icon, and this is gonna open up your scale highlighting. You can select the root note of your scale, so for me it's C sharp, and then you can select your scale, with major and the natural minor being the most common. Now you can take all of this information and turn that into bass notes. How? That's a good question. What I like to do for my bass notes is use popular progressions, or just progressions I know I already like. So for example, here I have a 1-6-5-7 progression. And then by turning that into triads like we talked about earlier, I can make some basic chords. But I don't want basic chords. So one thing I can do is I can move some of these chord notes around to build out more complex chords. So for example, if I get rid of this middle note of my chord, now I have a power chord, which is just made up of the 1st and the 5th. If I want a darker vibe, I can move that middle note down, and this will create a suspended 2nd chord. And because I wanted a dark vibe for my trap beat, I went with that suspended 2nd chord, and I pitched it up an octave to get a better chord voice. Now there's a lot more about chords that you can learn. I'll link a video up above about chords for you, but it's important to not get too caught up in what your chord exactly is, and instead focus on how it sounds. As well, for the second half of my chords, I added in a bunch more notes because this is going to pick up energy and just make it feel bigger overall. Now, melodies are a little bit more simple than chords because you don't have all these notes going on at the same time. But because of this, the individual relationship between notes is more important. So for example, notes that are side by side like this are going to sound dark and dissonant. Notes that are spaced out with 1 note of space are going to sound a bit more on the sad side. And then notes with 2 notes of space between them are going to sound a little bit more anthemic and big. When you draw your melodies out in your piano roll, you'll notice oftentimes that they take on shapes. Like my melody here kind of has a wavy shape to it. There's a whole thing in music theory about this, and I've got a video breaking down everything you need to know about making melodies. I'm gonna link that up above for you. Now, just by putting notes in time, I have rhythm, but to make a beat, you need drums. And yes, I'm counting my 808 as a drum, but for my 808, I'm just following the root note of my chords, which in my case is also the lowest note of my chords, and this prevents the 808 from clashing with my chords. At the same time, if you control the envelope of your 808 by turning your hold knob all the way up and the rest of the knobs down, you can create these short notes to add a little bit more bounce, and you can leverage space or just moments of silence to build on that bounce. There's actually a saying that I really like, and that's silence speaks the loudest in music. It's also really important to add in variation when you're creating your patterns, but you don't need to make drastic changes to introduce some variation in your beats. Along with my 808, I have this kick. I use the kick to accent certain beats over others, so when the kick hits, it's more impactful and creates a bit more bounce between the kick and the 808. Now the standard for trap music is to have your clap hit on the third beat. You can count the individual beats in your piano roll by the lines. So this would be one beat here, and this would be my third beat. Most other music has the clap hitting on the second and the fourth beat, and the reason for this difference is just because trap music is typically done in halftime. There's a lot of different components you can add in to build on the bounce of your rhythm. A really common one is adding in an accent snare, and because this is an accenting component, you want to have it more so lead into your other drums, so it's not really playing on the on beats. For my hi-hat pattern, I just use one of the MIDIs from my Lyra Essentials kit, but a lot of hi-hat patterns are built around the two-step, which is where you have your hi-hat hitting on every half beat. And from there, you can do a similar thing to your 808, where you remove notes or add in other notes like rolls to build out your rhythm. You'll also want to play around with things like your velocity, which is how hard the notes are being played. So my velocity increases at times and decreases at other times to create a more interesting rhythm. It's also really common to add in an open hat in your beats. These are similar to your accent snares, but you can also play them at the same time as your 808 to create a more impactful and hard-hitting 808. Now, when you put all of these things together, you'll want to mix them together so that they actually sound good. And the basics of mixing boils down to a few things, with the first being EQ. This is how you control the different frequencies and the volumes of those frequencies. So for this sound, I removed my low end to make room for my 808, and I felt the high end up here was a little harsh, so I dulled that down a bit. Another basic to mixing is your levels. This is just how loud things are. There's no specific number you should be going for, but instead you should be mixing the levels in relation to the loudest thing in your beat. So for most trap beats, that's going to be your 808. So what I recommend is solo your 808 by right-clicking on the little dot here, get your 808 to a volume you like, and go through your sounds one by one by clicking on that little dot, and adjust the slider for your level in relation to how your 808 sounds with it. If you want to learn more about mixing, I have a super in-depth video all about that. I'll link that up above. But once you have all of your components mixed together, you need to arrange them into a beat. And pretty much this just means taking the patterns you do have and splitting them in a way so that there's variation and different sections in your beat. So for me, I threw down the starter from my Lyra Essentials kit and added in this violin phrase from the same kit to act as some kind of intro. From there, I wanted to ease into my beat slowly, so I added in a transition sound to switch into that next section, and I added in these automation clips to make it more unique. To add an automation clip, all you need to do is right-click practically any knob or slider in FL Studio, and then press on the Create Automation Clip button. If you don't get that option though, you can move the knob that you're trying to automate, then go into Tools, select Last Tweaked, and then press Create Automation Clip. And you can use this to add in effects for certain parts of your beat. So for example, I automated the vinyl off preset from Gross Beat on my melody in the intro to switch into that next section. Now, in terms of arrangement, most beats are made up of hooks and verses. Your hook is going to be where you have the most things going on, and it's going to be the most high energy part of your beat. The verse usually comes before or after your hook, and this is where you'll want to kill off some of that energy. If you want to learn more about making beats, don't forget to subscribe, and here's the full thing.